Happy spring, everybody. We're here in Minnesota, and it's been a long winter. It's been crazy weather, I think, for everybody. So we're finally starting to see the robins, and the snow's melting away, and it's exciting. And I think that you'll really enjoy the content that Ethan is covering with these 7 steps to improve e-learning challenges today. It's a very timely. So anyway, thank you for taking the hour out of your day. And moving on, I'm Carrie Zenz, and we'll be moderating the next hour, and alongside with me is Brittany Lager, and she'll be providing just webinar support, so answering questions that are getting submitted through the questions pane and things like that. She'll be chatting out some information to you as well. Before I turn things over to Ethan, just want to cover a few housekeeping things in case you're not familiar with the GoToWebinar platform. You have 2 forms of audio, either with your telephone, the landline, or your mic and speakers. And Brittany's going to put the information for the telephone through the chat window. And then any questions, we're in listen-only mode, so if you have any questions today, please submit those through the questions pane. And we will be having Q&A at the end of today's session. And if there's any relevant questions to what Ethan's talking about throughout the hour, I'll be addressing those right at that time and having him answer those then versus waiting till the end. And then to collapse and expand your panel is there's the orange arrow there called the graph tab, so that can collapse and expand your panel. And then moving on, if any of you are Twitter users, you can please share your information or thoughts about today's session by using the hashtag 7steps. And today's session is being recorded, and we'll be sending out a link of the recording as well as the Zebra Zaps app, which the presentation was built in. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Ethan, who is our Chief Instructional Strategist here at Allen Interactions. So take it away, Ethan.
Thanks, Carrie. Hi, this is Ethan. Glad to have you all on board. As Carrie said, I'm the Chief Instructional Strategist here at Allen Interactions. I've been designing e-learning for a number of years and involved in our design philosophy. I also have a lot of other interests, and especially this time of the year, I'm eager to get out in the garden, and that actually is going to be the theme of the examples we have today. I'm actually in southern Illinois, so we're a little bit ahead of the folks up in Minnesota, but we just had a big snowfall, and it has melted, and I'm ready to get out in the ground. So anyway, we're going to be having some examples, but we're going to be anyway, so we're going to be talking this hour about what I've called the 7 steps to improved e-learning challenges. I've got to get the full screen again here. Hold on. There we go. And first off, I want you just to think for a moment. There's too many folks to try to gather the information, so I'm going to trust you to think on your own. But just going to give you about 15 seconds, and just when you are responding to the question, what makes a good interaction? Try to think, what are those 3 or 4 things that you think are critical for a good interaction? Okay, I'll give you a few seconds here. You might want to jot them down. So I'm going to give what I think, and hopefully you'll have some matches. But I think it's always important to get the starting point going. So hopefully you've got some ideas in your mind of what you think makes a good interaction. When I think about that question, these are the things that come to mind for me, that they have to actively engage the mind. That is, the learner has to be activated. That's a stupid thing to say, but I know you've seen e-learning where you can pretty much go on autopilot, and that's a bad sign because not much is going on then. They need to require attention and effort, same sort of issue. I need to pay attention in order to know what's going on. If you can be reading email equally as well as doing your e-learning at the same time, there's an issue. Another really good thing about good interactions is they enhance learner control. That learners should have more say in what's going to happen as we go forward. Also that are goal-focused, and instead of just feeling like you're answering a question, that you're actually trying to perform a task, reach some goal that has meaning, and that they're meaningful and memorable. They take you someplace that you feel like it's been worthwhile and that it creates a memory. I think these are probably the the primary things that you need to strive. There's a lot of other things that maybe came into mind in terms of how the content is provided, that how feedback is given, and I think those are all details that you can have some degree of flexibility in, as long as you are keeping these bigger, more important scale objectives in mind. Actively engage the mind, require attention, enhance learner control, focus on a goal, and create a memorable and meaningful experience.
So those are the features of engaging interactivity. And at Allen Interactions, we've been promoting a model called instructional interactivity to create that kind of engaging interaction. Now, in our model, instructional interactivity involves 4 required components: context, challenge, activity, and feedback. Now, by context, that's a specific context that provides meaning and relevance to the learner. It's sort of what says, what's in it for me? Why should I even care about this? Now, a challenge should be a compelling challenge that motivates the learner to apply active and critical thinking to the task rather than just guessing or answering thoughtlessly. So, a challenge gives some urgency. It makes the learner care. It should be something, often there's some risk or some consequence involved. Now, the activity really is just a gesture, and what really is good is an activity that seems to be a genuine response to the challenge, that it feels like the learner is doing something. And then finally, the feedback. What is valuable is to have this content-rich feedback that provides assistance for how the learner can do better next time. So those 4 components work together to create engaging interaction. Now, in this webinar, we're going to focus mainly on challenge. Just as a good place to start, I think too often interactions are built just to optimize scoring rather than thinking. We need to get a test score and ask trivial questions. Well, that's not a challenge. What you want is a challenge should increase the mental engagement rather than encourage guessing or superficial decisions. And so we're going to have some simple steps to try to give you some tools to create meaningful challenges.
Now, first, again, I need to apologize for anybody who's been in our sessions before, because you've seen these examples, but they're the quickest way I know of to get people to see the difference between sort of standard e-learning and what we qualify as instructional interactivity. So if you forgive me for a moment, I'm just going to show 2 examples to contrast what we're shooting for. The first one, and both of these lessons that I'm going to show are written on the same content topic area, and it's teaching bank tellers how to identify negotiable instruments. So a very typical approach is what you see here. It starts with the objectives. It may follow with a pretest where it's checking, what do you know about this content already? Sort of, sometimes it's not clear what the purpose of these pretests are exactly, but hopefully it's establishing some expectation of the outcome. But then after you're done with the pretest, you get a score, and then you get into the content where it is presenting some information, and here we see that we get several different types of items that can be negotiable, and then I can click on these and read about each, like whether it's a printed check, what is a counter check, and I can skip ahead to show you, there's other sections where I can explore reading the different parts of the check. But after each piece of information, typically you'd find a comprehension question. Basically it's testing, did you just pay attention to what I told you on the previous screen? So I imagine this looks somewhat familiar to many of you. I don't need to go into more details of it. You can see from the menu there's additional sections about the requirements of negotiability, a summary where again I can revisit what the main content areas were, and then a post-test. Now the problem with this, while all the content is completely accurate, you don't really have to pay that much attention to get through this. In fact, I was talking and not really reading anything on the screen, and I was actually making answers, some of which were correct, actually most of them were correct, skipping ahead, doing everything that the lesson required, and yet I was not engaged, I wasn't doing any kind of active effort, and in fact I have no idea what this lesson's about, if you know, based on what it required of me. And so this is a major failure of a challenge, because it failed to challenge me to even care about the content. So as a contrast, here's a different approach to that exact same material. So it gives some basic information. It starts with, you know, these are the requirements of negotiability, that I can read about the different elements. But skipping ahead, the real basis of this program is to put people into a performance environment. So here I am in the bank. I have checks coming, and I have to decide, is this negotiable or not? Now, if I just am guessing at this, like many learners would first approach, I'm just going to say yes. It turns out it holds me accountable. It says, you know, that's incorrect. You need to click on the area that doesn't meet negotiability requirements. So I'm not off the hook just by guessing. I've got to look at this. I can flip the check over and see what elements I'm looking for, and then sure enough, the bank is not printed on this, and so that's the problem. So as I go through this, I realize I can't guess. I've got to think about the problem. This one's missing the amount. And I think you can see, and this is a ridiculously brief introduction, but I want to get to our other content. The huge difference between the impact of this training module that I'm showing and the gray one that I showed a moment ago. This one, the learner is engaged in an active task. It clearly shows what this content expects of me. What am I going to do in the job? It actually is sort of motivating, because I feel like I'm doing my job, and that there's a test here that requires 100%, so I need to be really focused on not letting a bad check go through, and so forth. So these examples, we can get them to you if you're interested, if you want to spend more time, but hopefully just that very quick superficial glance at them shows how remarkably different they are. And indeed, when you implement these, and we've done some studies and the ROI on these, the change in performance based on learners going through the second one is remarkable compared to the change people going through the first one. So that's what our goal is when I talk about what are some ways to get to the challenge. Now the difficulty, and I recognize this, you know, when I show a finished product, it's sort of easy to say, well, I understand why that's really good, but I have no idea how I could get there myself. And so really what I'm hoping to do with this is provide some steps to help you start to sort of demystify how do you come up with these good interactions. I mean, it isn't magical. There's some very precise reasonings behind these and some steps that you can take. And again, we're only looking at challenge today. That doesn't mean that context, activity, and feedback are not important. But in the examples, I wanted to really focus on this so that there wasn't so much variability. As a result, I'm going to show you, and we're going to develop some interactions. I just want to acknowledge right now there's still problems with it because we haven't really fully dealt with context, activity, and feedback. But we're just really thinking about challenge today. And then the other caveat I want to provide, and I don't say this flippantly, but I'm saying it because I hope it's going to make you feel more confident. Because sometimes when you look at an intricate, finished interaction, it feels like it's so complicated with much branching and all sorts of different complicated structures. But in fact, nearly everything you are ever going to build in an e-learning program is a multiple choice question. But by applying this model, adding context, challenge, action, and feedback, we can sort of make it appear to be something much more significant, much more engaging. I mean, I like to think about it as almost like building a theater set. You know, when you go to a show and you see a great big castle on the stage, that's not really a castle. It's just a cardboard thing that looks like that. But it's believable and it does everything it needs to do. And in many ways, that's what we need to do when we're creating these interactions. You don't need to create a world that really is as complicated as it appears, but you need to make it do those essential steps that make the learner believe that they actually have a lot at stake. And so that's what, hopefully these steps are going to lead you in that direction. So first off, we have to have a just some base content, and so this is what's related to spring. I'm going to be talking about a hypothetical e-learning program about teaching about irises. I live on a farm actually and grow irises, so it's something I've become immersed in. And one thing that I've been amused by is, and if any of you are iris growers, you probably will have found this too, and it's probably true of anybody, any group that gets focused too narrowly on one topic, but the zeal and the interest with which they talk about irises is astonishing, and the vocabulary and the specificity and the arguments about classification is pretty extreme. But what we're going to say is we're going to assume that maybe we work for Shriner's Iris Gardens, and that's actually a real company out in Oregon. They're the largest commercial grower of iris in the world, and you know they have to hire a lot of seasonal workers to answer the phones when people call in to place orders. Now these people need to know a surprisingly specific vocabulary, and so imagine that we're creating a program that's going to teach people this vocabulary. And just to let you in on the secret a little bit, this might be sort of a typical approach with minimal challenge. So this is our baseline. You start with some iris terminology. You know, and you could imagine there'd be a picture of an iris flower, and these are the standards in the beard and the falls, and then some information. And then, in addition, these are all the various color patterns that terminology is used to refer to different colors of shades and different combinations and so forth. Now, you don't need to memorize that, but just to know that's sort of the world of content that we're talking about. So you might imagine an e-learning lesson would provide that information, and then would start following up with some typical knowledge check questions. So here's, you come across a light blue blooming iris, the standards are slightly darker than the pale blue falls. This is an example of A, and we need to figure out the term. Well, if I say it's a Emma Cook, nope, the answer is reverse bitone. Okay, well I got that one wrong. But you can imagine this would be followed up by a sequence of these, and in general this fails pretty miserably to live up to our expectations of good instructional interactivity. You know, it's not engaging, I can guess, I don't have any really consequence for getting the right answer, it isn't meaningful nor memorable. So what we want to do is figure, how could I change this? And what I'm going to do is provide 7 simple steps. And they seem very simple, and you might think, well, you aren't really operating at this, but I can really tell you that when I embark on a design, these steps are very specifically in my mind. As you do this more, they become second nature, and you won't have to do them so literally. But I really would encourage you, as if you're trying to break out of the old pattern, is to just follow this very rigorously. And maybe just do one step at a time. Do step 1 on your next example, and then keep on developing. And then when you feel comfortable with that, the next time you build an action, try to go to step 1 and then step 2 and so forth. So anyway, the first step is simply to make the learner seek any needed information. This seems like an unusual thing to say, but I think it's probably the single simplest thing you can do to transform your e-learning into something that the learners are going to be more engaged in. And by that, I simply mean, don't start out by telling people the content. Instead, suggest what the challenge is going to be. And here we say, in the following exercises, you're going to need to use specialized terminology to describe iris coloration. If you want to dive right in, press next and begin the exercises, or press the iris coloration patterns button if you want to do some research. So if I don't know anything about iris coloration, I can click this button, and it brings up that exact same content that we had started with in sort of the standard approach. And I can page through that and see what are the different pieces that I need to learn. But the big difference here is, since I know the challenge before I start reading, I'm going to read it with a lot more meaning and a lot more intention. Because the problem is, if you throw information in front of people when they don't have a reason in their mind to read, it doesn't create any meaning. It doesn't create anything memorable. So this simple step of before you show the content, let the learner ask for the content. And so make it clear that it's available. I could go ahead and say, I'm ready, and then I get in here and I realize, gosh, I don't know what this information is. At that point, that's a perfect time for me to go back and review. And the difference here is to realize that, interactions for learning are different than interactions for testing. And oftentimes you think, well, I can't provide that help button there because they'll cheat. Well, who cares if they cheat? Cheating is learning in this context, because you presented me with a challenge. I wasn't quite sure what the answer was, so I'm going to go do research to find it out. And that really is so much more empowering and engaging to the learner than doing the reverse, which is forcing somebody to say, you don't know why you need this, but read it now, and then later on I'm going to question you on it. Okay? So step one, simply make the learner seek the needed information. So now let's move on to step two. This is another one that is really easy to do if you have, if you just take the time to do it. And the main thing is make your interactions graphic. Eliminate as many words as possible. So, and the reason that is if we go back and look at the previous question here, if I was looking at the iris coloration patterns, you can do pattern matching very easily just by seeing the word, and sort of seeing blue and the color, and do very superficial processing of the content to get the answer correct. On the other hand, though, when you have to choose the answer based on the images, and the reference material is in text, you as a learner have to do that internal transformation. So I have to read this content, really understand what it means, and say, okay, that means this picture. So anytime you can shift it up a bit, if the content of the reference is mainly descriptive, then try to depict the content. And this is easy because it's just content knowledge. But even if you're showing a scene or watching something happen, show it visually as opposed to describing it in text if you can. So that's step two. Try to make your interactions as graphic as possible. Now here's the next step, 3, which is require careful attention to details. Now, let me see if the previous. Yeah, this is a question I was just looking at a moment ago, and our question is, which is a neglecta coloration pattern? And for those of you who are interested, a neglecta is one that's blue. It's 2 shades of blue with the top lighter than the bottom. So, of course, there's only one answer of these choices. It's the third one. But the problem is it's also the only one that has any blue in it. And so it's very easy for the learner to guess at this without paying attention to all the details, because if all they have to do is pay attention to is blue, and they could have completely missed the fact that it has to be 2 different shades of blue, and that the standards have to be lighter than the falls. And so you can see that this selection of choices that I can pick between doesn't really test my knowledge very carefully, and a very superficial reading of the content could mistakenly appear that you know what's going on. As opposed to this second example, where all of them have blue on them. And so suddenly, you have to pay attention to details. I have to say, not only is it blue, but it's 2 shades of blue. And so that rules out the second one, because it shouldn't have yellow on it. And then also, the top has to be lighter than the bottom. And so then that rules out number 1 and 4, and so that it's clear that I have to be thinking more specifically in order to get this right. And if you want to even make it better, increase the number of choices. Because, one of the things you're always fighting against in this unfortunate e-learning is you're wanting to make people not guess. You want people to be actually applying their reasoning. And the fewer the choices, the more reasonable guessing is as a great strategy. You know, true and false, if I were a student, most of the time I would just guess, because 50-50 chance is pretty, that without even a clue as to which is correct, is pretty good chances. And you can sort of skew it in one direction pretty easily and get right answers. With multiple choice questions, 4 is pretty easy to eliminate a couple and then get down to 2 in guessing. And so the more choices you provide, the less likely the learner is going to succeed by guessing. And there's nothing sacred about 4 choices. You know, that's just the custom that we have from our computer-tested standardized tests. But somehow we think, well, that's what you do. You put 4 choices, 1 correct. Well, if you can build it so that there are more choices, it's actually going to create the need for the learner to pay more attention to details in order to achieve success. Okay? So step 3 is write your choices in a way that require careful attention to details. Now, step 4. Put the question in a context that adds meaning. You know, just asking about those flowers in the abstract removes it from any place that you would actually be using that or needing to apply that content. It's harder to pick them out. It's harder to know exactly what you're even referring to or to test that. So just as a great way to put this in context is go to a garden. Instead of pulling the flowers out into your lesson, take your lesson to the garden and say, okay, here's the real world. Look at this flower garden and click on any neglected patterned iris in the garden. So I have to look through all these. So I remember I'm doing all my previous steps as well. I'm making the learner ask for the content if I need it. I made it graphic. I made the learner pay attention to details because there's all these different flowers that could potentially be a neglecta. And now it's in the context that actually makes sense. I'm actually in a garden. And so here's one I think that should be good. That's correct. But you can see how this is actually more interesting, but it also requires a great deal more attention on the learner's part to focus and see what's really needed here. Okay, again, I just want to, as we're going through, I just want to remind you that please feel free to ask questions as about any of these steps as we're going through. But here's step 5. Five is now diversify your question examples. Because one of the problems is that when you're testing, and in e-learning, one of the things you want to do, and it's actually one of the things that we fail at too frequently, is people need multiple exposures to content. It's almost impossible to learn something and remember it through one single exposure. And yet oftentimes, if you look through a lot of e-learning programs, you're going to find that there's one question about a certain thing, and then you move on. And if you fail that question, the best thing that happens is they repeat the same question. And so you're practicing that content in a very restricted environment. And so one of the things that makes it really uninteresting for your learners is once you get the first question, the task then becomes, can I remember what the answer was before, not can I solve this problem? And so what you want to do is make sure that as you ask questions and you review, you diversify your question examples so they're not the same all the time. So for instance, here's one, we're going from where we were before, we're asking the question in context. I could think it's these pink flowers and get it wrong. But when I follow it up, you want to provide it in a different context. So here's a different field of flowers, and I've got to figure out what are the neglected flowers in here. And if I look at the front, there we go. They're correct. But you can see how, again, it's more interesting, it's more challenging. It requires effort, it requires attention, and it makes the task more broadly meaningful that I could use it beyond the moment of the lesson. Okay, so step 5 was diversify your examples. Don't keep repeating the same question over and over. change the context, change the actual answers. Now, step 6 is hold the learner accountable. What I mean by that is don't let the learner off the hook. Because so often, learners realize that it doesn't make much difference whether I get the questions right or wrong. They're going to either tell me the answer and move ahead, and I'll be fine. And so if that's the lesson that I learned, I don't really have any reason to pay that close of attention. So what you want to make sure is that if I get this wrong, it tells me, no, those are something else, and it says these are a self, but I have to get the answer right. I'm not given the answer, and even after several tries, if I try to you have to finally work through to get them correct rather than being given the answer. The thing that you'll find is that oftentimes the reason you feel it necessary to give the correct answer after a couple tries is because the questions are bad. Because you find that the only reason people are doing it is they're guessing, and there's not much reason to expect other performance from them. But once you put it in context and you have an actual task happening, then it doesn't hurt to let the person just have to work it out for themselves. And as many tries as it takes, they've got to figure out to get to the right answer. So I would really, I think it's a very important principle as you keep thinking, how could I make small changes to improve the challenge, and just make sure people know that they ultimately have to get the answer correct, that it's not going to be given to them. Or if it is given to them, you're going to follow up with yet another question that they're going to have to do without help. And that knowledge really transforms the way they go about paying attention and attempting to succeed. And now we're here to the final.
Ethan?
Yes?
Hi, there's a question I wanted to address right now.
Okay.
And it's from Michael. He says, if your testing or development technology does not allow for hotspots, can you mark the options with letters and have learners select a corresponding letter? Would that take away from the context aspect?
Well, it would take away from the context a little bit, in that anytime you add something abstract or symbolic, you're removing a little bit of the reality. The idea of making a context is you want to imply as best as possible the real environment that you're in. And so since there aren't letters floating around in your garden, putting them in your e-learning is going to add a level of separation from context. But it's far better to have those letters associated with these images spread out all over this garden than to have them literally listed down the screen with text beside them. Because everything's a matter of degree, and one of the biggest lessons of designing e-learning is that almost everything is a trade-off, and everything is, you're balancing development characteristics, content characteristics, the time you have, the resources you have, all those things ultimately have some play in this. But my goal in creating context is to remove as many artificial indicators as you can. And of course we're always going to be left with some, because frankly the interactions, the way that you can interact with a lesson is pretty limited. You can click on things, you can point at things, and you can type letters. Because it'd be better if you go and pick the flower, of course. Well, you can't really pick the flower, and so clicking on it is what I think is a really powerful way. If your authoring tool doesn't allow you to have hotspots, that's a very big hurdle to get over, because I think one of the easiest and most powerful ways to create engagement is to have direct manipulation of elements on the screen, as opposed to doing it secondhand through letters. So But again, this principle would apply. These principles apply to whatever degree you can make your tool make them work that way. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, that sounds good. Great, Ethan. And then one other question from Terry. He or she, sorry. I said, would retesting be okay instead of forcing for a correct answer before proceeding?
Yeah, I think it depends. It sort of depends on your content and how many different choices you have. Sometimes, in this case, we have like an infinite number of possibilities, and so the guessing becomes really tedious, and so you can see that people would be motivated to try to focus. There's other cases where there aren't that many choices, and so you may be getting into a guessing situation very quickly. In those cases, then I would retest rather than, what you want to do is avoid having people engage in absurd activities. You wouldn't ever have somebody answer a true and false question, and they say the answer is true, and you say, no, that's incorrect, try again. Because that makes the whole thing feel idiotic. Because why am I trying again? Of course it's false, there's no other choice. And so I think you have to balance that with just the sense of the question and the challenge that you've created. And so if it gets to a point that it feels silly to make somebody repeat it, then by all means review it. And if possible, you don't review it immediately, but if you have several things that you're testing, test something else and then bring this one back after a few intervening other examples have come up. Because what that does is it makes you remember things longer. You're not just using rote memory to remember. On the last screen I clicked this item and you told me it was right, so now I'm going to do it again. What you want to do is have enough intervening elements so that when I get this back again, I'm going to have to remember the critical aspects of the content rather than the artificial aspects of how I answered the question before. Okay, hopefully that addressed your question as well. Any other things right now, Carrie, or should I move on to step 7?
There are, but why don't you just move on to step 7 and then we can address them after you finish
Okay.
that step.
Well, step 7 is another really powerful one, and now we may be getting into some issues that you may have more difficulty thinking how to implement these in some really very primitive authoring tools. You may not be able to do exactly what I've done here. By the way, everything you're looking at here was built in Zebra Zaps, which is a tool that we're very pleased to be developing and working with now. But hopefully you can take these principles if the tool you're using doesn't allow this specificity, but to apply this principle. And what really helps in our step 7 is to create multiple step challenges. That is, you have people doing multiple aspects at one time. In other words, you're sort of testing items simultaneously, and then you're going to provide feedback later. What this does is it forces me to do some more specific comparison. And the idea here is I could drag these little dots to identify different flowers in this. And I know that what my universe is, and I've got to try to balance which one might be a neglected, which one's a bitone. What's very cool about doing multiple step tasks, which generally means you're delaying judgment, is it allows the user to rethink some choices. And so, as I'm thinking about this more, maybe this one actually is a better example of a self. And that thinking, again, really engages the learner. When I know that I have the possibility of really thinking through this and coming with the best challenge. Again, this is back to that point I made at the beginning of user control. When you ask single-step questions and give feedback immediately, the learner has very little control of the learning, of the pacing, of frankly, of the thinking that they're putting in. This way, I can really be pondering what are the choices here, and then because they're all being tested at once, I'm sort of forced to confront those those differences. I don't have it on here because, of course, I didn't build all these interactions out entirely because it was just for demo. You would have a submit button here when I had all these placed in the combinations that I thought was appropriate, and say, okay, now I've got everything placed, and then they would be judged, and I could be told which ones were correct, and then I could fix those that were not. There are a lot of different strategies that you might do. That gets into the feedback aspect of creating interaction. But this really is, you're talking about the challenge, that it's more difficult to identify all of these at once, but it's also in some ways more of a helpful mental exercise, because this is sort of what I need to do on the job. I need to be able to compare and contrast and use these terms simultaneously, because that's probably more of how a conversation would roll out on the phone. Okay, so there are our 7 steps, and I have one more, sort of the 7 steps, and then sort of the big jump at the end. And this is, I think, when you can do this, this transforms your interaction into something that really is what I sort of call irresistible e-learning, because it puts the learner in such control and you can get such interesting challenges. And the idea is, whenever possible, create constructed responses. And what I mean by that is that the learner is actually building the answer. In all the examples I showed up till now, you were really just recognizing the answer. You were tagging something, you were looking at different things and saying, this is the answer. But it's already there, constructed for you. It's just a matter of picking out from different elements. But especially when you are teaching something that is involved in performance, and even when, in this case, we're just teaching content, but even making a content objective into a performance one really proves such strong understanding. What I mean by that is, the task is, here's a generic flower, and you have to color it to create a neglected pattern. And so I can pick color chips for the standards and different color chips for the falls, and it's really completely up to me to figure out now what really are the defining characteristics of a neglected. And it turns out it's, it's a light blue over a dark blue. Notice there's a number of different ways that I could create that. This would be a correct answer. This would be a correct answer. This would not be a correct answer, nor would this. But you can see there's all sorts of different combinations, and that makes it that much more interesting. But it also makes it, very likely that I could create something completely wrong. But that also then gives you a great opportunity to give feedback, because if I thought this was a neglected, there's all sorts of information I need to be reminded about of why that's incorrect. So this is the big payoff, but it really is built on those principles of the first steps. That is putting it in context, making the choices more requiring your attention. When I said one of the things is increase the number of choices is one of the ways to make it feel less like a multiple choice question. Here, how many choices do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I've got 11. 11 times 11, I've got 121 different choices that I could give as an answer. And so clearly that's not a good guessing odds. If I pick one in 121, I'm most likely going to fail. And so I'm always going to increase my success by actually thinking about this problem and trying to solve it. Okay, so there are our 7 steps plus the big jump.
So Ethan, there's a couple of questions on that bonus one you just showed.
Yeah.
The first question from Judith is, how would you give feedback for each choice the user makes?
Well, the thing is, once you have this many, there are some errors that matter and some errors that don't. Because if the user gave any combination of blue, you'd probably want to give a feedback message saying, you're correct in that neglecteds are blue, but you missed out on another fact that they have a different pattern. They have to be lighter on top and darker on bottom, which would be very different if you used any of the non-blue shades. You probably wouldn't worry even yet about talking, giving specific feedback about the placement, because you'd want to make sure that you were dealing with just the color issues. So it isn't that you have to write 121 specific feedback messages. You would look at the possibilities and categorize them as which ones indicate a particular misconception, and you'd end up with a much smaller body of the choices of feedbacks that you'd probably be prepared to give.
Okay.
Any other questions about this?
That covered both of them, so you can move on.
Well, what I want to do now is just show a concrete example of this. Because while it's pleasant to look at the flowers, I recognize, and I picked it because it's sort of a very limited and a type of content you can easily get your head around. Most of the things that you are faced with teaching are a little bit more complicated. So I just want to show an example that we were confronted with, that we ended up, I think, with a really outstanding bit of interaction. And hopefully now you'll see how these 7 steps actually led us to that place. Okay? Now the problem is, and we were working with an organization called Operation Lifesaver, and they're an organization that does a lot of great work about reducing, about safety at rail safety. So there are fewer fatalities and accidents between trains and vehicles and pedestrians and so forth. Now they came to us and they wanted to do a course about truck drivers, because there's a huge number of accidents that happen with semi-trucks crossing rails. Now when they came to us, basically what you see on the screen here is the content they had. There are a bunch of traffic signs that have to do with identifying upcoming rail crossings and what you need to do with them. They have this 6-step safety policy, and that you're supposed to slow when you approach a crossing. You remove distractions like turn off the radio, turn off your CB radio and stuff. You look both ways. Rock and roll, that means when you're in a big rig, the mirrors might block part of your view, so you need to rock forward and backward so you can see around those mirrors for sure. You roll down your windows and listen for a train whistle. If there are any controls or signage, that you make sure you obey those. And then after you've taken care of all that, you proceed with caution. And then there was a little bit of additional information about how long it takes to stop your truck based on how loaded it is. And storage areas is this: if I'm crossing a rail track and there's a stop sign ahead, I need to make sure I can clear the rail completely so I'm not stopped with my load over the rails and so forth. Now, you can imagine what a traditional approach to this would have been, because this is pretty straightforward content. You'd present that, and then you'd probably expect to have some questions like these. When approaching a rail crossing, which is not one of the 6 steps in safe rail crossing. Turn on headlights is obviously the wrong one. And then you could drag these signs to match their meaning. Now, I bet you that any truck driver with even very little preparation would probably pass this exam. Which, it's good that they would pass it, but the truth is there still is an astonishingly high number of wrecks. And so this level of content knowledge isn't sufficient. And it's lacking, because there's not much of a challenge. It isn't applied to the real world. And so what we did is we created a, I need to pull this up now. Here's the piece we created.
Take this course while you're not operating a motor vehicle. Get out of your truck if you'd like, grab a cup of coffee, and plan to spend the next 15 to 20 minutes working through the crossing challenges.
Okay, I'm going to skip right to the interactivity. This piece is available free, and I really encourage you to go to it. Well, it's available on our website. You can get a link to it, and we can send that out through chat as well for you to get it. Because I'm going to jump into the interactivity. But what it does, it puts the learner on the road. And we got here because we needed to make sure there was a challenge related to applying that content as opposed to just reiterating it. So here I'm going to go take the semi-truck loaded with furniture, and here we are going down the highway. Notice it's in context. I have lots and lots of choices because I have all these controls on my dashboard. I can turn the radio on, I can turn it off, I can answer the phone, but I have to slow down here because I'm coming up to a stop sign. But I can look both ways, look left, look right. I can roll the window down. I don't hear anything, so it sounds like I can proceed.
You've completed this crossing. Your trip continues.
So I made it through the first one well. Now I'm going to continue on down my path. My radio's going. I'm jamming out. I can actually change my music station to So now as a result, I was fiddling with that radio and I failed to slow down and I crashed, a train came and I was killed. Well, maybe I wasn't killed, I was hit. Oh, driver killed, yeah, there it is. Now, that's holding me accountable because now I have to go back and I have to start this trip over again. So it isn't that I can zone out, that I can just guess at things, because I really need to think about what are those 6 steps. How do I apply them at the right time, at the right pace, pay attention to what I learn? And that's really the missing piece from that content. And so here I think what it is doing is it's providing that challenge. And why it's such a good challenge is if we go back and look at our steps, these are all the things that were going on. You know, I didn't show it, but there's a reference thing you can go and read about the safety procedures. But it's completely graphic. There really are no words at all about the rules of driving. You have to pay attention very carefully to the details, what's coming up on the signs. The context, the roads, the different scenes, the truck panel, the dashboard. There are 9 different crossings you have to make, so it's continuing to test those 6 steps. But you have to make 9 safe crossings, and each one has different contextual elements. Learners are held accountable. You have to go back and do the test again. And there are multiple step tasks. You know, it isn't like, what do you do first? I need to slow down. Good job. Okay, now what's the second step? I have to chain all that together. I can sort of fix it. If I forgot to roll down the window first, I can do that yet. And it sort of reflects that in your scoring in terms of the Hall of Fame. But you're having to do all of that at once, which really creates such a very contagious excitement about doing it. And then it's sort of a constructed response in a sense that I have to build all the things that create that successful crossing. Okay, so there's that example. I know we're coming up to the last few minutes here. I want to make sure we have some time for any last questions, but then those are our steps. So what other questions do you have there, Carrie, for the last few minutes here?
The question was, they wanted to know what that was developed in, the railroad example, and then also to reiterate what the earlier stuff was developed in the IRIS content.
Yeah, all the IRIS stuff was developed in Zebra Zaps, which, again, the professional version that allows long, bigger courses and LMS connectivity and full lesson development. That was just released at the beginning of this year. The OLI piece was actually built in Flash. That was done about a year and a half ago, or a year ago. So it was much of that would be buildable in Zebra, but we haven't. It sort of predates the capabilities of big lessons. But the road test was built in Flash. One thing I want to tell you about that, though, is, if you think about the steps and you are limited by by your authoring tool, there are still things you could do. You could put people in that context. You could move them forward in a very much more primitive way, but still having them in the cab of the truck and making their choices through the controls of the truck rather than talking about it. Even that would be a big improvement, even if your tool doesn't allow sort of that timing and the dynamic animation.
Another question just related to the railroad one was, so for the road test, do you provide a separate module for instructions on how to navigate the interface, or was it done another way?
If you go through it, you'll see there's a very first section that just leads you through, and it says, stop now, can you turn the radio on? And so it just gives you the opportunity to try those things before you actually start on a road trip.
And then one final question, let's do our last question. This was asked earlier on. They wanted to know how you might apply those 7 steps you went through to soft skills or compliance training, other types of training.
Well, I think it's exactly the same thing. I think compliance training is not nearly need to be as boring as we make it, and that's because oftentimes we're testing on the rules or whatever the principles are, that safety stuff, and instead we should create challenges where I need to apply the rules. And so if it's emergency preparedness, don't ask literally, do you know this fact? Put the learner into a simulated situation where an emergency is occurring, and then they have to identify the steps to take within that context. Or soft skills, again, always think about where you would apply this and what type of choices would a learner be making in the real world. And then figure out a way that your question or your challenge can let the learner make that same choice online. Because the mistakes that we let people make in bad e-learning are faults of memory often. The choices that you want people to make in the real world are choices of reasoning, of thinking through a problem, applying knowledge, and making the right choice. And so you need to move your questions, no matter if it's soft skills or compliance, into putting learners into those challenging situations. Just know that you can visit alleninteractions.com, and there is an e-book that we put together that covers these principles, so you could get that. I recommend it's a good way to reinforce these ideas. So that's at our website. You connect with me on Twitter, and there's my email address. Happy to follow up with any questions you might have about what we talked about. And then just want to thank you for spending this hour with us. So please address any other questions. Sorry we couldn't deal with any more in the hour. And watch for the email for the video if you want to review any of this. So
we'll be emailing out the recording and then the app link from for the Zebras Apps presentation. And somebody asked if the ebook was free, and it is free. If you go to our website, go under resources, webinars, and white papers, find it there. But we'll also send out a link to it in the follow-up email. So thank you, everybody, for attending. Have a great Easter weekend, and hopefully we'll see you soon in another webinar. Thanks. Bye.